All right, so it's 10:30. It's 10:30 at night, and I start reading on the internet. This week's podcast is brought to you by the Canadian Gun Vault. Behind the vault door. Sorry, folks, we're going to break our radio silence. And we're going to talk about the SKS issue, which is a disaster already. Hasn't even begun yet. For those of you that haven't been paying attention to the podcasts and or taking a close look at the Instagram page, I love to give people heads ups. Let them know I got this bad feeling. And I've been talking about things. We might get these podcasts actually in backwards order. I really would like to, release the other ones first because I definitely make reference to something coming down the pike. I made a 20-year career out of avoiding trouble, being placed in dangerous situations. You start to develop a bit of a nose for it. And so when people are sitting there saying, well, it looks like they're not going to be doing anything. Oh, it won't be that bad. I can assure you, folks, I survived the 90s bans where we lost great guns that a lot of law-abiding people here in Canada did own. Things like AK-47s and G3 rifles, Thompsons, Browning bars, MG34s, some fully automatic, some semi-automatic, but all great guns that people want to own. And out of nowhere, the government swoops in and says, by the way, you can't have any of these. You can keep these, but they can never really leave your house, freely again like they once did. So they're a prohibited class. And they gave them all these designations, and it just made for a really complicated system. There's converted autos, full autos. They had all these different groupings of rifles, small pistol caliber, 12-4s like MAC-10s and Uzis, and these were all semi-automatic guns. So they're designed to go, semi-automatic fire only, and they're not really designed for any of the design was for a full auto machine gun. But then they came out with like semi-automatic versions of these guns that, aren't really, for Joe average, easy to convert back to full auto. You got to do some major machining work. And if it's not just right, you definitely could find yourself in trouble. Something that's only designed to go semi-automatic, and you start to monkey around with fine tolerances, and next thing you know, you got a gun that won't work, or worse still, it'll blow up. To make a gun go fully automatic, the information's out there. It's on the internet. There's no stopping that. So basically now, you've got these people that have, registered firearms, that are semi-automatic. And they can't really be made to go fully automatic easily. It's not like you pull out a pin and, all of a sudden the thing go brrr and you've got a machine gun. It's not that simple. And yet, with enough time, energy, and resources, you can make any semi-automatic firearm go fully automatic. If you know what you're doing and if you have access to the equipment and the inclination. I don't know any of the legitimate firearm community that would register their firearms and own firearms and risk their entire collections by, making something do something that it's not supposed to. And historically, nobody's done it in the lawful community. And yet, every time I turn around, we're being blamed for something that really isn't our fault. This latest, shooting in Las Vegas, as horrible as it is. And I would be the first guy to say, it is absolutely more than just tragic. It's abhorrent that somebody would do that. Can't take anything away from Las Vegas. It was awful. And I think that definitely I want to make perfectly clear. But I don't like the idea of being blamed. I don't like the idea of being blamed for somebody else's mistake. And I won't be confused with that. So when that happens in another country with different rules, I would like to know, how does that translate into something needs to be done here? I'm reading things Like the number of guns in this country has gone up. It's like skyrocketed. Law-abiding owners are purchasing firearms. People within the firearm community that go through the necessary steps to own firearms, they're getting their firearms licenses. There's more and more of us, and the numbers are climbing. And I'm sure it's making some people very uncomfortable. I kind of like the idea of vetted, certified, trained, and daily screenings of the individuals that own firearms. I love that. I'd like to see more of you out there. It tells me something about you. Like you've been good enough your entire life that, 2 ex-girlfriends ago, up to a couple of years ago, aren't going to say anything that bad about you that might prevent you from getting a license to do something. And yet every time I turn around, we're being blamed for stuff like a mass shooting in the USA. That's not me. And I refuse to be confused with that. So how come every time something like that happens, I've got legislators breathing down my neck, threatening to potentially take away my property? And I think that's something that should probably interest a lot of people. Just because you made the mistake of deciding that you enjoy firearms, at any time, somebody could arbitrarily change the rules and threaten to take away your property and or your lawful enjoyment of it. So I'm going to argue that if you actually spend the money while the laws are a certain way, you should be allowed to continue to enjoy that property the exact same way you did when you purchased it. I think that's fair. I think that if somebody tried to come, knock on my door and tell me that there was a car involved in a, accident, a vehicular assault, somebody decided that they were going to run over, a person in British Columbia, with a red, red Chevy. And, you happen to make the mistake of owning a red Chevy too. We're seizing all these cars, or we're banning all these cars. That's the term, ban, right? They want to ban things. So we're going to ban all these cars. And unfortunately, sir, yes, we know you've had a perfect driving record. We know you didn't steal the car like that guy did. You actually have been a good person, just driving to work and to school and to pick up your girlfriend, every week. We know that you're actually not the problem. But you know what, though? We got a lot of people, they're unhappy about, red cars. So we're here to take your car. And so I imagine you'd sit there as a car owner. We're just talking about Joe Public. Try and imagine, folks. If you don't like guns, just imagine the government suddenly changing a law that has a dramatic impact on your life, maybe financially. Maybe it's your passion. Hey, how about if somebody walked into your house and told you, I'm sorry, we're seizing all your fishing equipment. Fishing is no longer legal in this country. You probably would sit there and say, well, hold it. I go fishing, every week. That's the thing I love to do. And you'd be pretty upset at the idea of them just saying, well, I'm sorry, there was a fly fishing accident in Zimbabwe. Some madman decided that he was going to, try and put somebody's eye out with it. And you know what? We don't really care how much you've invested in it. And we know that you've, done some great things for the community. We're really sorry. You're a good person, but we're going to, seize your stuff. You probably would sit there and say, I'm not giving you my fishing equipment. Or I'm not turning over my red Chevy. No, absolutely not. You would be up in arms and say, this is ridiculous, right? I got nothing to do with that guy. If you could try and imagine for some people, firearms really are their golf, or their fishing. And, to have the government suddenly change the rules for whatever reason or whatever motivation they may have for doing that. The SKS rifle. The SKS rifle has been imported by, surplus rifle importers for many, many years now. And it is by far the single most pervasive rifle in the Canadian firearm community. So we're talking about this thing is everywhere. It's non-restricted. You've got this rifle, great rifle. I love these things. A lot of people said they were junk. I told you they were going to be collectible, folks. If they're going to be collectible, it's because they're not going to be, allowed into the country anymore, and they're not going to be sold. And depending on how the government feels about it on Wednesday, right, I think that we're, going to hear about, potentially banning this rifle. And I like to talk about bans a little bit on the Instagram page. For the people that watch things like my prohibited firearms or Canadian gun laws have to change. If you look at those hashtags, Canadian gun laws need to change or have to change. You'll know that the government loves to ban guns. And I mean, if they decide that they're going to ban SKSs because there was a study done, and I remember when this one came out, it broke, I think it was about 4 years ago. I saw that there was some kind of study done by the RCMP, and right? They have a problem with SKSs and M305, M14s. M14s, M1As, the semi-automatic versions of the M14s. They have problems with these types of guns, and they've outlined them in this list, and there was some reference made to how easily they could be made to go full auto. And so I'm sitting here thinking to myself, okay, so now you've finally figured out or decided that you might want to take issue with the SKS rifle, which is the rifle that everybody owns. And suddenly you want to do what? You want to ban it? Well, there's a problem with that. Try and ban that non-restricted rifle. And I'm sure there's an anti-gunner out there that's going to make a terrific argument out of this one, saying, well, see, if they were all registered, this wouldn't be a problem. I could tell you that the barn door is open. And I don't think that people quite realize, and one of the things that I would make reference to is, as a police officer, again, you'd see trouble coming. I could tell you where the problem would lie. And I think that honestly, if the leadership came forward and talked about some of the things that were discussed years ago, certainly, there was some realization. At some level of government, there was a sign of intelligence. Somebody said, if you ban a thing, it might create a problem. And here it is. When you ban something, right, all you really do is create the perfect environment to feed the black market. And for those of you that have, again, been listening to what I say on the Instagram page and to a lesser degree, Facebook, I can tell you right now that when you ban something and you've got this group of people that don't trust the government, and historically they've screwed you over, because I mean, if you look back to like the early 90s and the mid 90s, there was this request by the government saying, in celebration of legitimate firearm ownership in this country, we're only asking politely that you register these particular firearms. If you have them, they will be declared, whatever status. And so then, they had a number of people turn in the guns. And of course, there was a percentage of the population, I truly believe, that decided that they didn't trust the government. They had some of the feelings that a lot of us are having today, with 200,000 giant floating ducks. I mean, not a lot of inspiring confidence decision-making going on at the parliamentary level. Not from where I'm sitting. I don't know. What do I know about politics? I was a politician's son for 23 years. Hell, I could probably say for my entire life. My father knew how to dictate, and he also had a great, business sense. And, he had a real sensibility about him. There's absolutely no way anybody in their right mind would be able to believe that you're going to ban the most pervasive rifle in existence in Canada and have people trust you and turn them in. So what ends up happening is this. Some people don't comply. And that group that doesn't comply, right, now is operating outside the law because the government has asked that you turn a couple of things in or you register some things. You do that. And if some people don't, here's the problem. Those people now are operating outside the law. So now they can't sell their rifles back to other people. So now the only choice they have is to sell the guns that are operating outside the confines of the registration they're demanding. They're operating outside those confines, and they find their way into non-qualified hands. What's really happened here? Right now, you've got people that are qualified to own these rifles. To ban them, where the restricted ones are. But to tell people to bring in their non-restricteds, and for the people that don't comply, you're creating potentially a much more dangerous situation, in my opinion. There's a lot of tinfoil hat theories about why the government would maybe not want you to own guns. I don't know, there's a meteorite that's going to hit us, or, there's going to be an economic collapse, or, the second coming of Christ. I mean, I've heard it all. I personally, I have my theories. I've heard some things that actually, make me think, there might be something to that. Certainly the Las Vegas shooting generated a lot of stir in the firearm community. You've got now the SKS, is being yanked off the shelves of stores. I saw Tracy Wilson doing something early in the morning, and she said that there was, something being told in terms of a story of having some problem with distribution, and their importer that they've been using was no longer renewing the license, and they weren't taking them off the shelves. And yet, there's some sort of email that's circulating around now. I mean, I can't really confirm it. I've heard from, people that I know that are pretty well connected and directly kind of plugged into the matrix in terms of news feeds. And so I believe it when they say that, this is what's going on right now. They're yanking SKSs off the shelves. And that to me is like watching the beach disappear. If you've ever seen a really big wave come in, and you've been on the beach, like the whole beach kind of grows substantially as this wave builds power. And, I love making analogies for the people that actually, watch me work during my years of service. I love making analogies, and I love comparing things, and if you see, the beach just suddenly growing substantially, and you see the water start to, kind of get a little tall, get ready, hold your breath. We definitely got something coming down the pike, because when a big store in, Canadian culture, like Canadian Tire, starts taking guns off the shelves, I'm thinking that people are covering their asses. You probably got somebody in corporate saying, you know what, they're going to ban them. We can't have them going out the door. I mean, from the minute anybody knows, that there's going to be something happening, that these guns are going to be banned and they can't be sold. If somebody from up top gets wind of that, I mean, money talks, people golf and all that other stuff, you get guys, sooner or later somebody breaks and leaks word. Something big's coming. So you've got, SKS rifles suddenly coming off the shelves, no longer be sold. Stop sale. The minute somebody from Canadian Tire actually knows that they're going to be banned or no longer available for sale, if one goes out the door and gets used in a crime and they track it back to that store, they're on the hook, potentially, from a legal standpoint. So, it's pretty obvious that something's coming, and people are looking to, make sure that there's, no blame on their part if something goes sideways. The SKS coming off the shelves is a great indication, I think, that we're going to see the resurfacing of this study done by the RCMP indicating that SKSs were bad, and so were M305s, and, and a list of others. If I remember correctly, it was about 8 strong. So, I mean, there's potentially 8 guns on the chopping block. I mean, there's talk of Tavors and other stuff. And I mean, I had spoken to a very, again, credible source and a dear friend of mine in the know. And he told me that something was coming down the pike on the magazines, something to the tune of the large-bodied magazine of like a, AR-15 would no longer be allowed. So, like, you couldn't have these big, long, scary magazines. It doesn't really matter that nobody's drilling out pins and using them for crimes in this community. But if you happen to make the mistake of owning, these magazines that you probably own for, potentially, years, decades, in some cases. Suddenly now you're going to be unable to be in possession of those items. So what are you going to do about that? A bit of a problem. You got about 8 billion magazines out there that are like of the 30 rounder type. There's absolutely no way you're going to collect all those. I can tell you right now that if you tell people to turn them in, I mean, even if I never once endorse breaking the law and I say that everybody should just do as they're told, I can tell you that there's going to be a hell ton of people that are going to hold on to those things and tuck them away. And, you're going to create overnight, potentially tens of thousands of criminals if you do things like change magazine laws like that. So, I mean, I don't know what they're thinking is going to happen. I know that this is probably a really good move to make. The firearm community has never been more organized. I'm seeing them starting to really get connected, in social media. The Instagram page is a terrific indication of that. We grew to about 52,000 in a year and a half. There just seemed to be such a great response to people that wanted to, learn about rifles and shotguns and pistols and, the history that goes along with these items. It grew for a reason. We tried our hand at some YouTube videos, did a little bit of shooting. Some people said I, sucked. I can tell you right now that I haven't felt comfortable in front of the camera. And there's a shame, connected to firearm ownership. I had a really good friend of mine say that he, as a gun owner, was ashamed, when he heard about what happened in Las Vegas. He kind of wanted to hang his head. And I remember the 90s. God rest her soul, Vivi Limones was shot. A young lady was shot at a Just Desserts, by 2 criminals. And neither one of those guys would be the ones that you would find on the trap range, on a Sunday morning, with a cup of coffee. To continue to put us together in the same sentences, law-abiding gun owners and the people involved in these crimes is ridiculous. And yet we always seem to pay, during events like the one that we saw in Las Vegas. I've got nothing to do with that. That's another country. Right? They don't sell bump stocks here. And yet we need stricter gun laws. If I'm starting to see studies that say the number of guns in the country has gone through the roof, and yet the number of crimes involving guns has gone down, and yet we're really not dealing with major issues like, ethical conduct, questions going unanswered for extended periods of time. A lot of the things I'm seeing going on in government right now really require, some kind of distraction. Always nervous about that. A lot of sleight of the hand in politics. It gets a little crazy. I had some exposure to it in 23 years. So these SKS rifles are out there. And I think that we're going to get into some form of reclassification and a request to bring them in. If the government should decide to push that one, I really do feel that, at this stage, love the RCMP, love you guys. Not digging, though, the administration if they're pushing a political agenda. If that's the case, you know what? People are talking about that. And you know what? It makes me a little bit nervous. I used to be part of an organization, and I know what it's like. And you do have to toe the party line in many respects. I can tell you right now, I would never suggest that the RCMP is doing anything other than their jobs. But you know what? It's kind of funny that this comes out now. SKS are coming off the shelves. I think something's coming. It's coming very soon. I've been calling for it in previous podcasts. I've been talking about it on the Instagram page. I think we can get ready for, something resembling that. Magazine restrictions, the bodies of the magazines, anything bigger than the 5-rounders, and you're out of luck. You're in possession of a prohibited weapon. Turn it in or go to jail. We know you have them. It's absolutely ridiculous. If they go that route, they're going to be creating such problems. I cannot believe that anybody wouldn't think that one through. So I'm going to call it right now. If they decide to reclassify SKSs and request that people bring them in, right, make a law that says that you're in possession of a prohibited device or weapon if you don't turn it in by, if the government's not willing to offer us ample compensation, I'm going to argue that they shouldn't be able to interfere with the lawful enjoyment of something they said was okay, not just a month before. I remember in the 90s, I had purchased a Tech 9 pistol, and it was a cool little piece. It was the junkiest, Uzi. I don't even call it a knockoff. If you couldn't afford an Uzi, you bought yourself a Tech 9. And they were a favorite among gang members in the U.S., which, of course, I had nothing to do with. And yet I made the mistake of buying this one 2 months before a ban. And I got a letter in the mail that said, you know what? You're turning it in for destruction or you're going to jail. I remember feeling really not so good about that. And I remember exporting it out of the country. And so I got an ATT to bring it to the U.S. border to leave it. And I made arrangements to bring it to general order storage so that my cousin could import it into the country legitimately. I did that like in good faith. I called up the CFO and I let the border know I was coming, and so I get to the booth and I guess nobody's debriefed the guy. And so I'm going with a Tech 9 to the border to leave it in general order storage so it can be legitimately imported into the United States of America. And I get to the border and I tell the guy, he goes, citizenship, I'm Canadian. What's the purpose of your visit? I'm going to be dropping off a firearm in general orders storage for pickup on the other side after it's, paperwork is done and it's legally imported. He goes, what? Right? And I hear like a buzzer or something, and I could tell something's not right. And he says, go tell that guy over there what you just told me. So I, drive over to the next guy and I tell him. So next thing you know, I've got this place kind of up in arms. I hadn't done anything legally wrong. Like I had gone through the necessary steps to transport it appropriately. Trigger lock case, unloaded state. That's the way firearms travel in this country, legally. And for the people that have licenses, they know, the penalties are pretty stiff if you get caught, with a loaded gun. So, people are like really well behaved. Like for the people in the legitimate firearm community, they're never in any problems. I don't want to say never, but sometimes things go wrong and they get in trouble, which is why a group like the CCFR is so fantastic. They offer insurance if you get yourselves into, trouble unknowingly. Like if you make the mistake of forgetting a piece of paper, you might go to jail. Or at the very least, you might get yourself a hefty fine. It's a piece of paper. I don't think there's any need for anybody to go to jail. And yet it's a reality for firearm owners, which is kind of scary. By our very nature, we actually obey the law. So, we're kind of easy targets. This is the time, though, when I think it's really important that we get a hold of our, lobby group leaders and we say, what's going on? I'm tired of being on the defensive. Every time we just kind of put our shields up, we end up getting pushed back a couple of feet. I don't think that's the way it should be this time. I think that we should take a much more proactive stance on the subject. So I think that it's important that we kind of lean on our lobby leaders. I've never claimed to be a lobbyist. I'm entertainment. I love telling people about the guns, shooting the guns. I like, talking about the historical significance of firearms. But, hey, you spend time on Parliament Hill. There's definitely people that paid lobbyists. They're up there, and I definitely think we got to know what's going on up there. Because something's coming down the pike, and we should have some wind of it by now. Other than releases in the news. Maybe we're going to get ahead of the game and start to complain to our members of parliament. I would beat them to the punch. That's always a good way to go. If we think this thing is coming, why not write into your member of parliament? Why don't we call in? I love encouraging people to call in. When something outrageous happens, I say call Ralph Goodale's office. But you know what, though? I'm going to spare Ralph some of the flack this time. I'm going to suggest that we end up getting, our members of parliament riled. And that means your member of parliament. Call them up. I think that it's really important. This news drops. People are going to be, angry on Friday. Saturday, maybe you're more relaxed. By Sunday, you're kind of tired. Monday, maybe you forget. I'm going to suggest that on Monday, everybody call into their member of parliament. Let's tell them we heard something. All right? It better not be like that. The Canadian firearm owner has been stepped on for 30 years. I can see why some guys would be a little bitter at this point. I might be one of them. Controlled and composed, but maybe just a little bit leery of things that I'm seeing. If you're going to try and turn me into a paper criminal overnight, all right, I'm going to make some noise about it. I'm thinking if something's coming like that we should definitely put our hands up and say, no way. All right, that's not us. I'm thinking that we're going to get some kind of notice that something's happening sometime soon. Let's beat them to the punch, folks. On Monday, and I want you to take the time this weekend. Find out your member of parliament's telephone number. I'm going to call it CGV homework. Get a hold of your member of parliament's telephone number, his email address. Right? Hey, spend an hour. Write something brief. I will not support anybody that imposes further restrictions on legitimate firearm owners while having zero impact on the criminal element. and stop. We got to send a clear message. Anybody that decides that they're going to punish us for things that got nothing to do with us, they're going to have to start looking for a new job. Send a clear message, folks. Get a hold of your member of parliament's telephone number, get a hold of their email address, and come Monday morning, and I mean try all day long. If you keep getting a busy signal or if they put you off, don't let them. We should flood their call centers. We should bother their assistants. We should make it known that we will not be stepped on again. It's important that we stay composed, but don't be afraid to express yourself passionately. Time to be assertive. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. It was a little impromptu, something I put together when I saw the news. I had to speak to it. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed it. Have yourselves a great night, folks. Be safe.